One. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Welsh Republic podcast, episode 108 today. And I am here with my guest, Laurie Spencer. How are you doing today, Laurie?
Doing pretty good. Thanks for having me on, Welsh.
It's a pleasure having you on here, too. What have you been up to today, Laurie? Anything much?
Oh boy, yeah, I've been fighting with YouTube and the censors all day long. You want me to tell you why?
Yeah,
Ask
sure.
me
Go ahead.
why.
I remember it was because you just shared a Twitter post to me earlier where it said that you got banned off, like you got like a strike on YouTube where it said you can't, stream and do anything for 90 days over like a Robert F. Kennedy thing, right? So tell
Yep.
us about that.
Well, as you know, I'm involved with the Kennedy for President campaign. I'm an enthusiastic supporter of Robert Kennedy, known the guy for 15 years or more, and have always wanted him to run for president. Was involved in a draft Kennedy campaign back in 2007. Wanted him to run in 2008, but he wasn't ready then. So now that he's ready, we're doing this and we're running for president. So I'm the co host of a podcast every week called RFK All the Way. And it just launched last week. And I posted our first episode to my YouTube channel. And there's a lot of other stuff on my YouTube channel. I'm a journalist, and so there's all my work with Maverick News and other places. But I posted episode one, and it was up for a couple hours, and then I got a notification from YouTube saying that they had removed that broadcast. And not only that, they gave me a strike on my channel for 90 days. I can't do anything. I'm basically off the air now at YouTube, all because of a podcast about a guy running for president. And it was a very professional podcast. You know, I'm a professional journalist, broadcaster, been doing this for 35 years. I'm careful when I go on the air, especially on those touchy subjects like vaccines. And they cited medical misinformation as the reason that they took my podcast down. And here's the kicker: we didn't even talk about the vaccines. We didn't say a word about COVID. It was all about the campaign. It was campaign news. My co host, Matthew Tower, was in Boston that night covering Kennedy's presidential announcement. He was there in person. So this was a real news program with newsworthy value about a man who's running for president of the United States. And YouTube took it down for no good reason at all. There was nothing medical whatsoever in that podcast. We said nothing about that subject at all. It was all about the campaign. And I think I know
Uh,
the bigger reason why they're doing it. You may or may not be aware of this, but right now, Bobby Kennedy is involved in litigation with YouTube and its parent company, Google, as well
oh,
as
wow.
yeah, he's literally suing them right now. They're involved in a lawsuit. He filed suit. It's an antitrust lawsuit. And it's not just YouTube and Google that he's suing. He's also suing Facebook, parent company Meta, suing the BBC and CNN and CBS and the Washington Post and the Trusted News Initiative. It's a long list of offenders who that he's suing them for censoring us, censoring everybody, censoring him. And he is still banned off of platforms like Facebook and Instagram. And obviously, he's still banned on YouTube as well. And I'm the proof of that because it just happened again today. And then episode 2 of the podcast was supposed to premiere tonight at 6:30. And we hadn't even got past our intro music, Welsh. We hadn't even opened our mouths to speak.
That's
And
that's absolutely. I
YouTube killed
think
our stream while we were live. They took it down while we were live in
That's
progress.
absolutely ridiculous, Laura. I think that has to do with the fact, that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. obviously, has to, like he is very anti, jibber jabber,
Hmm.
and I'm referring that to. And I think that
Oh,
one of
okay.
the reasons why that is the reason why they're taking him down is because he's very anti that. And he's also, he's a huge threat to the elite, especially with John F. Kennedy, when he was a big threat to the elite, and one of the things John F. Kennedy wanted to do was end the Federal Reserve. He wanted to end the Vietnam War. He did want to make peace with Cuba. He wanted to get the troops out of Vietnam. He also wanted to get rid of the banking system, which was what he
Mhm.
wanted to get rid of the Federal Reserve. And same thing, I also saw in one of your podcasts where, Robert John F. Kennedy's uh, brother wanted, what's his brother's name again? Bobby, what's his name again?
Robert Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy.
Oh yeah, Robert Kennedy. Robert
Or
Kennedy
you mean
wanted
his
to get
other
rid of.
brother, Ted Kennedy? Which brother?
No, the one who wanted to get rid of poverty. It was Robert. It was
Robert
Bob
Kennedy.
Robert Kennedy, right?
And
Yeah,
and
Robert
Senator
Kennedy
Ted
wanted to
Kennedy
pretty
also did a
much.
lot of work on poverty.
Yeah. And when you mentioned that, it makes me think to myself, especially today, hearing the news that the Democrats are actually not going to be having a primary, debate thing, which is
Mm.
absolutely ridiculous. And another thing that just came out, Laurie, is 70% of Americans don't want Joe Biden to run. Even Democrats don't. That was by an NBC poll. And it
Yeah,
makes me think to myself, that just proves that the orange man won the 2020 election. I mean, it just proves that, it
careful.
literally proves that. And it just shows, that it just shows that, that Kennedy is a threat to the establishment. He's a threat to the elite.
Absolutely. And it's no surprise to me, really. I mean, it is, but it isn't that President Biden will not debate Robert Kennedy. He's just not going to do that because Bobby
I
would
mean,
mop the
will he
floor
even be
with
able
him.
to show up? Will he be even able to show up to debate? I mean, today when he announced he was running for the 2024 election, I'm like, this is elderly abuse. Stop.
Right. I know.
You know,
you can't help but feel kind of sorry for the guy. But I don't feel that sorry for Joe Biden because politics is not hacky sack, right? We need to have debates. We need to hash out these issues. And if Joe Biden is going to run for president, Joe Biden should be prepared to debate. He should be prepared for a challenge, especially when he's that unpopular. As you just referenced that new NBC poll. So, today I actually tweeted at the president and I just said, debate Kennedy, you coward. That's it. That's the
I
tweet.
know.
That's the tweet.
So, Laurie, tell me about where you met Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Bobby, where you met him and like when you first spoke to him, and what would you say, has been, the best word of advice he's given to you before when knowing him? And what would you say is your favorite policy that, out of all the policies he wants to bring in, as president that you really like the most?
Let's see. I guess my first meeting with Kennedy would have been in 2007, sometime in the fall, down in Texas. I lived in Austin, Texas for 25 years, by the way. So yeah, that was, and we met at several stops along the road. And I was just pestering the hell out of him back in 2007 and 2008. Just, we had a Draft Kennedy campaign, we had a petition drive. We were doing everything that we could to convince him to run. But the time just wasn't right, in my conversations with him back then. There were many reasons why he wasn't ready. His kids were still pretty young back then. He wanted to focus on being there for his kids. And that's very admirable for anybody, but especially when you consider the fact that he lost his father when he was 14. His father was assassinated after winning the California primary in 1968. So he grew up without a father, and he comes from a family of 11 children. That had a tremendous impact on Bobby's young life. And I think he didn't want to take any chances with his kids. He's got 6 kids. So that was a lot of parenting to do, but his kids are now grown. And also, if you remember back in 2007 and 2008, especially once we got into the primaries in early 2008, that Barack Obama emerged as this this great candidate, right? Everyone just fell in love with Barack Obama, and his momentum back then was
Oh, absolutely.
unstoppable.
Everybody thought he was the Messiah.
Yep.
I would say a long time ago, just 2 months ago, I was on a voice call with someone, and it was a Republican guy, and he was saying that, it was very scary because the left, seemed to worship Obama as like this goddess, God figure, like he's the second coming of Christ. And that was like on a Time magazine, I think. And it was just, and it's so funny because also, Barack Obama was also against gay marriage. He was also, against a lot of things.
Mm.
And he says he was against this, but then as soon as he gets into office he changes. It's just like President Trump. President Trump said he was against the wars, he was against the war in Iraq, he wanted to get rid of the military industrial complex. But what happens as soon as he gets in? He increased the troops, and he increased the bombing in Somalia, he increases the bombing in Syria. He also continues the bombing, in Yemen. He also, he said he was going to stop the war in Yemen, but he continued that. And he also, bombed more countries. He dropped more drone strikes on countries more than Obama did in his first year. Trump did. That's a lot of what the Republicans don't want to talk about. And also, he also wanted to go to war with Iran. Which was very dumb for Trump to do. And he also, pretty much, he also increased the military budget, and he also increased the military, and he said he was anti-war, but then yet he was bringing all these wars, and he also kept, funding the Yemen war, which is, one of the biggest human right violations in the world, which is one of the biggest, human, rights catastrophes going on in the world right now. And it's just absolutely insane.
And I'd like to add to that. A lot of people thought Barack Obama was anti-war, and I don't know why they thought that back in 2008, because I was listening to him very carefully. I was watching every speech, listening to his words, which most people were only listening with one ear open because they were so in love with the idea of the first black president. And the second coming of JFK. Remember, the press held him up as some sort of JFK figure. And I wasn't impressed by any of that because I was listening to what the guy was actually saying. And what he wasn't saying he was anti-war, not at all. He was talking about prolonging and stepping up, having a surge in Afghanistan. He wanted to win that war in Afghanistan. He was going to escalate the war in Afghanistan, and in fact, he did. And he also never made any promises. Well, he pledged to get us out of Iraq, in 5 more years. And that's not good enough. That's not anti-war.
That didn't even happen at all. It didn't even happen. It was just a mess. Sorry, say it again, Laurie.
I was just going to say, a lot of people were fooled by Obama. He was a very clever actor. He was very good with that script, I mean, he was lost without his teleprompter, remember? Anytime the teleprompter would malfunction, so would Obama. He would freeze. He didn't have any words. And that, by contrast, when you watched Robert Kennedy's speech last Wednesday night, it was almost a 2-hour long speech. It was incredible. But the most astonishing thing about it was there was not a teleprompter anywhere in sight. This guy doesn't use a teleprompter. He didn't even have a written speech in front of him on the podium. I mean, most of that speech was, ad lib. He was just talking to you from his heart. Have you ever in your life, I can answer this, no, you have not. You've never seen any candidate for president of the United States come out and make a speech like that. They always have prepared remarks. They almost always use a teleprompter. He didn't need one. And that is why Joe Biden is terrified to debate this man. Period.
Oh, absolutely. By the way, Laurie, you have a friend who wants to say hi to you on the chat. It's Taylor
my buddy
here.
Tyler. Hello, Tyler. So glad you could be here, man. Thank you for tuning in.
How do you know Tyler? How long have you known her for?
Tyler is with the Center for Political Innovation, a terrific activist group here in the States. They just did the Summit for Hypocrisy last month in Washington, D.C., and they gave Biden an earful with a big protest outside the White House, which was pretty awesome. Tyler, his friend Caleb Maupin, who's the founder of CPI, they just do wonderful direct action, direct activism, and they're just damn nice guys. I really like spending time with them. They're frequent guests on our show, Maverick News, and I have yet to be a guest on their show, but we're going to do that soon. I think we're going to end up hosting a show together, actually. I can't talk about it yet, but we're working on a really exciting new podcast that's going to launch in May. And I think Tyler's going to be a part of that.
He just brought up a good comment here. Trump didn't start any new wars, which is true. That's absolutely true. But I do think, he didn't do enough to stop the military industrial complex from rising. And he did want to start a war with Iran, but people will have different opinions. He says here, Obama started Syria, Biden started Ukraine. Obama set the stage for Ukraine with the maiden coup in 2014, which is very true, especially,
Absolutely
when the
true.
genocide of, what the Ukrainian army was doing to the ethnic Russians, the neo-Nazis, in the Ukrainian army, the Azov Battalion were doing, to the ethnic Russians in 2014, which is just one of the worst suicides. And it was orchestrated by Victoria, what's her name, that second name?
Victoria Nuland. Undersecretary
Newland, John McCain, and Lindsey Graham. That's very true, Tyler. Absolutely true. He's also saying here, CPL represent.
A CPI. That's the Center for Political Innovation. Shout out to CPI and all their good work. And I just want to add one name to that list of guilty parties that Tyler just called out. Don't forget Joe Biden. The whole Ukraine project was Joe Biden's baby.
Absolutely. And it's not just that, it's not just that, Obama, Bush, Clinton, they all set the stage for Al-Qaeda, ISIS, the Azov Battalion, they're all funding that, The shooter here, by the way, in New Zealand, the Buffalo shooter, the Christchurch shooter here in New Zealand actually went to Ukraine and Pakistan, and he was inspired, by the Azov Battalion, in Ukraine, and even the Buffalo shooter was. So
that's right.
Speaking of that, Laurie, what would you say is your favorite policy that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is going to bring in that you think is very good? And what would you say, was your favorite, quote that his, father, Robert F. Kennedy, did of all time?
Ooh, man, those are some big questions. How do I pick just one thing that I like most about Bobby's platform? There's so much to love there. I'll tell you this. I have 4 key issues that motivate me as a voter, because I can only speak for myself. Number 1 is getting a pardon for Julian Assange. That's been one of my key issues since the day they pulled him out of the Ecuadorian embassy. Since before that, I was advocating for a preemptive pardon. But Trump didn't do it. Biden is never going to do it. There's only one man who's going to save Julian Assange's life, and that's Robert F. Kennedy. He has said that Julian Assange deserves a pardon. He just had Julian's dad, John Shipton, on his podcast to talk about the case. And I know that he will pardon Assange, and I hope he'll do it on day 1. If Julian is even still alive by then, if he can hang in there until January 2025. And we still don't know what's going to happen between now and then with his extradition, with his trial. Who knows? A lot could happen between now and then. So that's issue number 1. Issue number 2 is getting those JFK files released. We were supposed to have them 5 years ago under the JFK Records Act of 1992. All of the records related to the JFK assassination were supposed to be made public by October of 2017, which would have been on Trump's watch. And Trump said he was going to do it. He put out a tweet saying, I'm going to release it all. I'm going to release everything. And then the next day, the FBI and the CIA paid President Trump a visit and obviously prevailed upon him. He got rolled. In other words, and he said he wasn't going to. Well, he did release some of those files, but he continued to keep a lot more classified. And he had every opportunity to do that while he was president. He did not. Then it was Joe Biden's turn. And Joe Biden has also caved to the intelligence community twice now on the JFK files. And so several JFK researchers, historians, people that I know are suing right now the Biden administration, trying to pry those CIA records out of their hands and putting them out in the public. But still, that's going to, I'm sure the federal government's going to delay and delay. That lawsuit will probably drag on for years. So it may well fall to the next president of the United States to finally use the power of his pen, the power that the JFK Records Act gives the president under that 1992 law. And Bobby Kennedy will sure as hell do that. I think we can all count on him for that, right? No question. Number 3 is holding Anthony Fauci, Bill Gates, Francis Collins, and probably the heads of certain pharmaceutical companies, I won't say their names, accountable for what they've done.
And let's not forget the WEF people,
Right?
Carl Schwab, also
Mm-hmm.
the other people run it, who are very evil people, and George Soros too. All of those guys, the Rothschild, the Rockefellers, every single one of those criminals,
And
who have done
unfortunately, we
just
don't have any jurisdiction over them in the United States. They're
mm,
not United States citizens; they are citizens of other countries, and I
nope.
I don't really think that we could claim jurisdiction over them to prosecute them, but we can prosecute Anthony Fauci. We can prosecute Bill Gates. There are many others who can and should be prosecuted. Bobby, if you read his book, The Real Anthony Fauci, or watch the documentary, if you're not much of a reader, if you don't have time to read books, Bobby's done a documentary film called The Real Anthony Fauci. It's available for free on Rumble. You can watch it all. And if you don't finish that film or that book thinking to yourself, somebody's got to be held accountable for this, and we all know who. Well, Joe Biden certainly isn't going to do that. And Donald Trump, if he wins re-election in 2024, he's not going to do that either. He's just not. He had every opportunity to fire Anthony Fauci and Francis Collins. But what did he do instead? He brought guys like Scott Gottlieb, a pharmaceutical prostitute, into his administration. He brought in Alex Azar. He took $1 million
and
from Pfizer.
and let's not forget, Operation, Warp Speed, that's been an absolute disaster, which is one of the reasons why I stopped supporting Trump in 2021.
Mm-hmm. I understand completely. I supported Donald Trump's run in 2016. I'm a libertarian, but I just couldn't stomach Gary Johnson in 2016. I couldn't vote for him.
Gary Johnson was not good enough. But
also,
Laurie, you also going to be mentioning a fourth issue that you really liked too.
The most important thing of all. How could I forget? Ending the war. Bobby is staunchly and consistently anti-war, and he has been since the 1960s, since the Vietnam War, which he opposed. He opposed the Afghan War and the Iraq War and this current war. He's not a fan of this war at all. There's been some misunderstanding, I guess, about his position on the war. And I can't speak for him. I can only tell you what he said. What he has said consistently is that this war is not in the benefit of the United States, period. And that we should not be getting into confrontational positions with nuclear armed countries like China and Russia, especially when Russia has a hell of a lot more nukes than we do. He literally said that.
Oh, absolutely.
He's like, what are we thinking here? This is not going to end well. That's his point.
And And if you think about it, it was a war, the United States started, from the illegal CIA coup of 2014 when they tried to overthrow, Donbass or Donetsk, was it the Donbass Republic,
Mhm.
and especially, when the United States government is giving, all of these, neo-Nazis weapons to kill the ethnic Russians in 2014.
Yep.
In my opinion, Russia had every right to go in there and liberate the people of Donetsk and Donbass, especially when they wanted to be free and wanted to be their independent nation, wanted to be a part of Russia, because Eastern Ukraine is very different. They're very Russian. They have a lot of Russian people living there, and you compare that to Western Ukraine. Western Ukraine is very very different.
Yes, and a lot of people don't realize that Eastern Ukraine is still very Soviet. That's Soviet country. They never
Yep.
wanted the Soviet Union to break up. They, that's a very communist area in Ukraine. And of course, this battle has been going on inside of Ukraine for over 100 years between the Ukrainian nationalists and the Soviets after the revolution of 1917. So it was always the communists fighting the fascists. And that's been the history of it
I
for 100 years.
So, Laurie, going back to that, like the whole John F. Kennedy thing,
Mhm.
how do you think the world would have been like? Okay, so here's a question. How do you think the world would have been like if John F. Kennedy, let's say, he somehow survived getting shot, right?
You mean
And
if the Secret Service had
he
done their jobs
somehow recovered.
properly
Let's
that
just
day?
say he just got shot in the arm. Ha-
Uh-huh.
yep. And let's just say, what do you think John F. Kennedy would have done? Do you think, especially after him almost getting killed, do you think he would have said, gone on a podium and said, that there are these evil people like the Rothschild and Rockefellers and the Federal Reserve controlling the United States? And how do you think the world would look, going forward economically, socially? How do you think John F. Kennedy, would have got along well with, the Soviet Union president, back then, because I remember in your videos you said he would have met, and how do you think, he would have handled, other issues, like with, how do you think he would have handled, China and everything else going forward? Do you think the world would have been a better place? And do you think America would be a lot better than it is now if Kennedy had survived?
I do. I often love to ponder that, sort of an alternative history, what it might have been like if the Secret Service had done their jobs properly that day in Dallas, had that guy in the front seat of the limo been on top of Kennedy after the first shot rang out, Kennedy would have left Dallas with a survivable throat wound. There never would have been a headshot, period. So let's just say that he did survive. Um, but what he would have done, and it was already his priority, and he was working on it before Dallas, was warming up the Cold War. He was trying to end the Cold War. He had found a friendship of sorts with Nikita Khrushchev. They had signed the nuclear test ban treaty that summer. They were already talking about doing more cooperative projects together, more trade. These were good things. This was a step in the right direction. He was also doing back channel negotiations with Fidel Castro in Cuba and trying to warm up that relationship. I think, Kennedy was an internationalist and he was respected around the world in ways that no American president has been really since. And as Bobby Kennedy said in his speech last week in Boston, it's one of the last things he said was, you can really tell the mark of a great president by how the rest of the world views him. And to this day, there are more monuments and statues and buildings and streets and bridges named after President Kennedy all over the world than any other
What
American
would you
president.
say? What would you say out of all the bridges, that have been named as your favorite, landmark of out of all those landmarks that have been named after him?
Hmm. John F. Kennedy plots in Berlin. I mean, that's where
Hmm.
Kennedy gave one of his most important speeches in June of 1963, the Ich bin ein Berliner speech. It's amazing. If you watch that speech, you've never seen so many people crammed into this square in Berlin. It's just like got to be a million people. And then you've got the people over in East Berlin on the other side of the wall. peering out of their windows and trying to listen to him because he was censored on the radio there, right? They couldn't watch or listen on the media, so they were literally sticking their heads out the windows and gathering next to the wall to hear him. So he was beloved on both sides of the Berlin Wall. He was beloved by the communists and he was beloved by those in West Berlin.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. That sounds really good. What would you say is your favorite speech of John F. Kennedy that he's ever done?
Boy, that's a tough one, but I would probably have to go with the what we call the peace speech. It was June 10th, 1963, on the campus of American University. It's a commencement ceremony, Washington, D.C. And in that speech, it really,
Wow, that must have been a.
bulk of it is.
Mm.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, keep talking like you were saying. Keep talking.
Well, it's a beautiful speech where he is, again, trying to warm up that Cold War. Most of the speech is about Russia and the Russian people and honoring their many achievements in science, in space, in the arts, saying that they're only humans. We're all mortal. We all share the same planet. And it's time for us to, set our differences aside, even if we disagree on politics. That was huge. That no American president had ever said anything like that, especially during the Cold War when Russia was supposed to be the enemy. He humanized the Russian people in that speech. He humanized the Soviets. And he said, they might be communists, but they're people too. They love their children too. And we're playing a nuclear game of chicken here. This isn't going to end well, So it's a beautiful speech, and I hope it's more relevant today than it was then, or every bit as relevant. I encourage everybody to go listen to it. The American University speech by President Kennedy.
So your friend Tyler just brought up a really good comment here saying, shut down all the 800 military bases around the world, bring our boys home, let's rebuild America. We try to strengthen it out of the rest of the world. We're falling apart at home. I absolutely agree. And not just that, and the Federal Reserve and the military industrial complex, stop with these wars, and not just end the Ukrainian war, also end, the genocide that is going on in Yemen, also end, the Ethiopian war that's even worse, the Ethiopian civil war that is being funded by the globalists and elitists, and also, end the Sudan. Do you hear what's going on in Sudan right now? Absolutely crazy,
Absolutely crazy, yeah. And Bobby said in his speech, when he closed his speech the other night in Boston, he said, I'm going to close every military base around the world. I'm going to bring our troops home. He was real clear about that. That was a campaign pledge. And that made me happy as a libertarian because I've been a Ron Paul libertarian all my life. And Ron Paul has literally been saying that for more than 40 years. And Ron Paul was very happy to hear Bobby say that. He was giddy. And Dr. Paul never endorses any presidential candidate, but I can just tell this might be the first time ever that Ron Paul endorses a presidential candidate, and a Democrat at that. Can you believe it? Can you believe
Yeah, I
it?
know. Pretty funny. Well, I mean, the true meaning of liberalism is being open and being free. I mean, liberalism itself, just like the Conservative Party, both of them have been absolutely destroyed to death, So speaking of that, Laurie, on your Twitter, I see that you do absolutely fantastic threads, like about, the history of Nazis in Ukraine, the histories of Nazis in the CIA. What would you say out of all the threads that you did was the one where you were researching and doing, was the one that really touched your breath and was really hard for you to get your mind together and write this, and just made you feel like really just disturbed by the crimes that the United States government has and the military industrial complex has had, the one you thought, what on earth is the United States doing?
There's so many crimes. Where do I begin? I tell you what, I'm going to retweet my favorite right now so that everybody can find it. If you go to my Twitter, it's at Real Laurie Spencer on Twitter. and it should be the first tweet that you see. It's about declassified CIA documents tracing the whole history of the CIA's involvement in Ukraine from the Second World War until the end of the Cold War. These are documents that were declassified in 1998, and it took several years for the documents to filter out. The National Archives had to go through them and copy them, digitize them, upload them. So the public didn't really get to see a lot of this until 2004, 2005. And back then, most Americans weren't paying attention to Ukraine. It wasn't on our radar. So the story just kind of got buried. Nobody was talking about it. Journalists really weren't writing about the revelations in these documents. To be honest with you, I didn't find these documents specific to Ukraine. I'd been going through the documents about the German Nazi war criminals that we brought over after World War II. If you read The Devil's Chessboard by David Talbot, it's about Alan Dulles recruiting all these Nazis, protecting them from prosecution at Nuremberg, and bringing them into the United States and Canada and getting them into South America and protecting them and using them as CIA assets. But we only knew about the Germans. We didn't know about the Ukrainian Nazi war criminals, and no Ukrainians were prosecuted at Nuremberg, by the way. The Ukrainians were our friends, and they were useful to us in the Cold War, in the battle against the Soviet Union. And so we were arming and funding and training these Banderites, these Nazi Ukrainian nationalist groups like the OUN, the UPA, the OUNB, to be sort of a proxy army to do guerrilla warfare against the Soviet Union. And there were many different cryptonyms and code names for these projects. If you want to go look them up and learn more about it yourself, you can find these documents in the National Archives, also on the CIA's website. And I have links to that in my Twitter thread. I have copies of some relevant documents, and there are thousands and thousands of pages. It'll keep you busy for a while, but it's really interesting reading. You can read about Project Aerodynamic, which was also known as Project Cartel, Androgen, AE Carthage. That was from like 1949 to 1970, and then was reclassified under project name QR Dynamic and QR Plum, and those were in operation until the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. Now, at that point, supposedly, they didn't do that stuff anymore. There wouldn't be any need to, right? We're friends with Russia now? Not really. Those things are still going on, and we know now that those are the origins of the current conflict over there in Ukraine. So, in other words, the CIA never really stopped meddling and using these Ukrainian nationalists in Ukraine, and in fact, put them into power in the Maidan coup in 2014. These are the same people. These are the descendants of the Ukrainian resistance network. The freedom fighters is what they were called by the CIA. And many of those Ukrainian nationalist leaders, guys like Mykola Lebed, were brought into the United States, even though he had a conviction for murder and war crimes. Alan Dulles made a personal request to the Immigration Services, INS here, to look the other way. It's supposed to be illegal for Nazi war criminals to come to the United States. There was a law against it. So the INS had to be convinced to look the other way, and they did. And they let Mykola Lebed into the country, where he ran a publishing firm called Prologue Publishing in New York for many years, decades, publishing anti-Soviet, anti-communist propaganda, pro-Ukrainian propaganda.
Because one thing I saw, I remember one video you said, if there's anything more than a Nazi hates than a Jew, it's economist. They
That's
don't like
exactly right.
economists at all. They don't, they killed a lot of economists. And let's not forget Operation Paperclip, how
Mhm.
NASA and the CIA had Nazis working along them, absolutely disturbing. When I was reading that, I was like, wow, hearing the news about that, like, the fact that, neo-Nazis, like, creating, like, helping be in the CIA and just having so much influence on Western culture. And, like, it's disturbing, to
And we
see
only
the
find
United
out,
States.
like, so it's just amazing we only found out about it and it was confirmed in these documents, like 60 years after the war,
I know,
after we
right? And
after
I
we
just
fought the
and
Nazis.
I know, just seeing, like, all of the taxpayers' money that should be being used, for healthcare or
Mhm.
social development or industries, especially in the West, whether it's in New Zealand, Australia, UK, France, Spain, Belgium, or United States. And then it's funny because it's also funny, how people like AOC and Biden say they're for black people and they care about Jews, but yet
Mm.
they're giving money to these as far right, groups like the Azak Battalion or ISIS or, Al Qaeda, who hate Jews. And that, like, if you think about it, they're in no position to lecture us about all this crap and all that, especially when they're giving these people money. And it's funny, how Black Lives Matter, pretty much care about black people, but yet they're giving money towards these people. It's just, the whole
Oh, they
thing is
love
just
black
insane.
people. Welsh, they love black people so much that they just indicted 5 members of a socialist black revolutionary group called the Uhuru Movement here in the United States
Yep,
last week.
I,
That's
I
how much
saw
they
that.
love
Absolutely
black
ridiculous.
people.
So could you clarify that for me, because I heard it was those 5 people. I heard
Mhm.
apparently they were saying that they were, like, they were being accused of Russian propagandists, like, or something like that, which is a load of rubbish, and it's absolutely
Literally.
nonsense. I mean, what?
Yes, yes, that literally that's what they are being accused of, among other things. When you read the indictment, it's shocking. It's truly, truly shocking when you see what they're actually being accused of. One is that this group was conspiring to sow discord. That's a quote. Conspiring to sow discord. That's not a crime. That's freedom of speech. Isn't every protest kind of sowing discord? Donald Trump, isn't that what he did so well? Was, sowing discord? And, also, they've been accused of spreading Russian propaganda. That's what the DOJ indictment
Yeah,
said,
which is
which is not a
absolutely
crime,
nonsense. I think
even if
it's,
they
I
were.
was watching. I was watching Kim, what's her name? The girl that you went on, Kim,
Oh, Kim
her
Iverson.
show, Kim,
Yes,
yeah, who
love her.
absolutely brilliant journalist. I think she's
Mhm.
fantastic. And she was mentioning that this is very scary because basically if you're someone who is even friends of a Russian or even, doesn't have anything to do with politics, you could be, hunted down and killed. It's like the Biden administration has, like, this authoritarian, because especially, like, when Tulsi Gabbard, left the Democratic Party and she saw, how the Democratic Party were, pretty much criticizing, and going after, their opposites, especially when she brings up a point like that. Um, Going back to the Kim thing, she also brought up another video called apparently Catholics are being targeted by the Biden administration. And it's funny how the Biden administration say they're for freedom of speech and freedom of right, but yet going
Wait,
after
what?
opposite leaders, it's
Biden's a
just what.
Catholic.
Mm,
Biden's supposed to be a
exact. Yep,
good Catholic. What?
I know. It's
Huh?
absolutely outrageous, isn't it? And Biden says he's for freedom of speech and he's for Christianity, but yet he's going after them. It's just absolutely
Oh,
nonsense,
oh, and then
Laura. It
did you
is.
see his big presidential campaign announcement video today that they snuck out at like 5 o'clock in the damn morning? It's like, why?
Oh,
Why did you put that out at 5 o'clock in the morning when everybody's asleep? And that's when they launched this video. But when you watch the video, it's infuriating because he's gaslighting us about freedom. It's like he's all about freedom. Joe Biden is now Mr. Freedom. This guy has done more to destroy our freedoms during his presidency than any president since George Bush. Might even be worse than George Bush, because when you look at this Restrict Act that is winding its way through Congress,
yep.
I mean, this is
It's and
scarier than the
it's
Patriot Act.
funny because it's not, a TikTok bill. The TikTok bill, it's not to ban TikTok. It's the
Right.
Restriction Act, and the Restriction Act is going to give the government, more control and allow it to spy on us. Even though the government of the United States already has this ability, to access our credit cards, access this, access that, because they already have that, especially with spy not where, and they probably could be spying on us right now. They could be spying on a lot of things, which they already had that ability to do that for a long time. I
Thanks to
just
the Patriot
think
Act.
that this the thing that the United States, the thing that that people are not speaking about the Restriction Act, and they're more worried about drama on Twitter or this and that, or Tucker Carlson getting fired from Fox News. There should be a mass protest against the Restriction Act, because this is just like a new world order policy that is just trying to push Agenda 30 down people's throats, and it's absolutely scary, because if this Restriction Act does go through, it's just going to give the government control over like Rumble and all that, and that's
They can
not
lock you up for 20 years if they don't like what you do on the internet, literally. And also the Uhuru movement, when you look at that DOJ indictment, the language is so broad that you could fly a 767 through it. It could be applied so, just this is horrible. And this guy's lecturing me about freedom. Freedom. He's the guy who gave us vaccine mandates, who forced us to take under, coercion of losing our jobs, of not being able to participate in society. Don't forget that was Joe Biden. Now, how is that freedom? This guy is the anti-freedom president, and he sits up there in that video today and talks about freedom. Just made me so angry. Seriously.
One thread I was reading from you was Operation Unthinkable, and it was like in the 1950s how Winston Churchill actually wanted to do a plan with the United States and wanted to bomb Soviet Union. How crazy is that? Do you want to clarify Operation Unthinkable, what it is about, and what other facts people should know about it?
Oh, I'd be delighted. I love talking about Operation Unthinkable. In fact, let me find that thread. I'll retweet it. So if you're following along on Twitter, you can read the documents yourself. It's absolutely amazing. Now, here's the story. This will blow your mind if you haven't heard it before. Before World War II was over, remember Franklin Roosevelt passed away on April 12th, 1945. Less than 2 weeks later, our ally, Winston Churchill in England, has this idea, because by then the writing was on the wall. Nazi Germany was being defeated. It was just a matter of time before surrender and the war would be over. Now, Churchill had this bright idea. Hey, isn't the bigger enemy communism? Let's go get the Soviets now. I mean, we've already got the American troops over here on the continent. Let's put them to work, and let's use repurposed Nazi prisoners of war. Put those guys back on the battlefield with British troops, French troops, Allied troops, and we're all going to turn around and we're going to go invade Russia. The same thing that Hitler had done just 4 years earlier in 1941 with Operation Barbarossa, the big invasion of the Soviet Union,
which is the biggest, which is the biggest operation, military thing, or the biggest military operation in human history.
That's right. And so Winston wanted to do it again, only this time we would be invading our ally. I mean, Russia was our ally in World War II. The Soviets were our allies. The Soviets did the vast majority of the fighting on the Eastern Front. They inflicted the most Nazi casualties, and they suffered the greatest losses. They lost some 27 million, I believe. Nobody paid a price in World War II like Russia did. And Winston Churchill then wants to go invade our ally. Oh, but it gets better. It gets better. We had just invented the atomic bomb. And Winston Churchill was trying to prevail on President Harry Truman to use a nuclear weapon against our ally, the Soviet Union. Just let that sink in for a moment.
Wow, that's absolutely disturbing, isn't it?
Yeah, and here's the really disturbing part, guys. We didn't even know about Operation Unthinkable. And there are reasons why it ultimately did not, go into operation. First of all, because it was insane. It was crazy. But there were also other reasons. One thing, we didn't have enough nukes. The nuke was a brand new thing, and we only had one, and we decided, or two, we were going to drop them on Japan instead. But originally, the plan was to drop them on Russia, which is what we didn't know until the year
To drop them on
1990.
Russia, wow. I
Yeah, our
didn't. That
ally.
is, you know,
Yeah. It's crazy. I know it's crazy. And I don't expect you to believe me because it sounds so crazy. So just go to my Twitter. You'll see the tweet and you can go down the thread. You can go to the British National Archives of the UK. You can see these documents for yourself. And here's the important part to remember: this was kept secret from the world until after the Soviet Union fell, because obviously the Soviets might be kind of angry if we had disclosed this. So they waited until the 90s. It was finally declassified, I think, in 1998 or 1999. So, yeah, these documents were kept secret from us until basically most of the veterans of that war were dead. Because can you imagine how angry you'd be if you fought in World War II against the Nazis? And then you find out stuff like this. I mean, our troops fought side by side with the Russians. We formed friendships forever with those Red Army soldiers, with those Soviets. There was a deep and lasting bond made on those battlefields on the Eastern Front. We were not about to turn around and go invade them, or worse, nuke them. And there was nothing left of Russia. There was nothing left of most of these Soviet cities after years of fighting the Nazis. They were in rubble anyway. And we were going to
same with
start
Western
World
Europe.
War III.
Western
Yeah,
Europe was an absolute dire state at that time too. You know, in
yeah,
the United States, they had every opportunity to rise up, but let's not forget, you know, it wasn't, you know, Winston Churchill who was the people controlling him. It was the Rothschild and Rockefellers and the bankers. It was the Greater Bank of London. Those are the guys pushing it down our throat. Those are the guys wanting to do the war. Because the thing is, the United States never wanted to go into World War II. They only went into World War II because of an inside job that happened
hmm
when Franklin Roosevelt knew that Pearl Harbor was going to happen, but he completely ignored it. And one of the reasons is, if you think about it, in World War II, the bankers and the elitists, they made so much money off these wars, whether it's been even if it's been the Iraqi war, the Libyan war, Syria war, or even, you know, the wars that, you know, they had, you know, against like in Nicaragua or like Panama. It's just insane, you know. So
right.
yeah,
That's right. And Winston
yeah.
was always a warmonger. I'm not one of those people who thinks that Winston
Oh,
Churchill was
he is.
the
He
greatest
killed.
ever, guys. I
He
don't
he
understand
he,
why
he
people love
killed a
him.
lot of people in he killed a lot of people in India. What the
Yeah.
British Army did, you know, to a lot of people in India, what the United States did, you know, to even before World War One and World War Two, doing, you know, the wars against the Spanish Empire, doing the wars against Fiji, doing the war they had against Fiji, against, you know, the Spanish, against, you know, the Native Americans, you know, just absolutely messed up, you know, all the things that they, you know, the United States, you know, if you think about it, the United States in history, a lot of people say that China and Russia, you know, have been the biggest, you know, warmongers in history. Well, that's far from the truth. If you think about it, the United
Nope.
States has been the biggest warmongering country in the world, but not because of the people. It's because of the military industrial complex, and it's because it has to do with the bankers and stuff that run the United States government. That's absolutely insane, you know?
That's a fact. And let's be really glad that Winston Churchill lost the election in July of 1945, because Operation Unthinkable was supposed to go operational on July 1st, 1945. The plans were drawn up by his top military staff. They were ready to go, ready to go. And if it wasn't for Winston losing that election, we probably would have been in World War III right after World War II.
Um, Laurie, I just want to try and find something. Just give me a minute. Just keep speaking about the Operation Unthinkable. I just wanted to bring something up. Hang on, sorry. Just keep talking.
Sure. I can talk a lot about Operation Unthinkable because it's a subject of endless fascination for me. And what fascinates me most is that even now, 25 years after the documents were declassified, most people don't know about it. In fact, I was even talking to Scott Ritter recently and interviewing Scott Ritter. And, he's a military historian. I figured he'd know about this one, but I stumped him. It's hard to stump Scott Ritter. And I asked him, I said, "What do you know about
Wow.
Operation Unthinkable?" And he says, "What?" So I start telling him the story. And he's like, "What? That's crazy." I said, "I know." I know it's crazy, but it was real and it almost happened. And he was like, "No, no, that can't be right." So I sent him all the documents and he looked and he was like, "Holy shit, it's true." Pretty amazing. And when you read these documents about Operation Unthinkable, the arrogance and the hubris of the British in really thinking that they had some chance of defeating the Soviets. Are you kidding me? I mean, the Soviets had just kicked the Nazis' asses all the way back to Berlin. And we thought that we were going to defeat them. And yet nobody dared to tell Winston that this was a really bad idea. Like, no one dared say, "But Winston, the Soviets are our allies." And the stated objective, and I'm quoting here from the documents, was, quote, "to impose upon Russia the will of the United States and the British Empire." The goal was, quote, "the elimination of Russia as a country." Does any of this sound familiar? Like, are we doing this now? I'll read you some more. "A quick success might induce the Russians to submit to our will, at least for the time being, but it might not," the planning document says. "That is for the Russians to decide. If they want total war, they are in a position to have it." Wait, what? Total war? Didn't we just finish a world war that devastated most of Europe, and we still haven't finished that other war over in the Pacific yet? But Churchill was obsessed at that point with finishing off Russia. You know, the country that had saved Great Britain from the Nazis? Yeah, Russia, that Russia. And you can just imagine Winston, can't you? Like, deep in his cups, drunk one night, obsessing over how he's going to destroy Stalin. He's going to destroy the Soviets. And now there's nobody to stop him because FDR just died 2 weeks earlier. Because if FDR had been alive, he would have never let that happen. He had a strong alliance with Joseph Stalin. You might even say a friendship of sorts with Stalin. Those two had great respect for one another. And he was not about to let the United States get involved with an invasion of Russia. But FDR was gone. And now Harry Truman was in power. And you know, Truman actually gave this plan some pretty serious consideration. Now, some of his top generals thought it was nuts. I mean, like General Dwight Eisenhower said it was madness. General Patton was all for it, you know. As Patton famously said, we'd been fighting the wrong enemy all along in World War II. He was staunchly anti-communist, and he wanted to go finish off Russia. So, um, and before you say that Operation Unthinkable could never happen, I'm going to read to you point 8 of the plan from these original documents. It says,
Sure, sure. Go ahead. Go ahead.
"To achieve the decisive defeat of Russia in a total war would require, in particular, the mobilization of manpower to counteract their present enormous manpower resources. This is a very long-term project and would involve the deployment in Europe of a large population of the vast resources of the United States, the re-equipment and reorganization of German manpower, the Nazis, and of all the Western allies." That, my friend, is precisely what is happening right now in 2023. Can you believe that? Just wow. So this plan has literally been on paper since 1945. What we're doing right now. Are you still there, Welsh? Can you hear me? I think Welsh may be gone. Is it just me?
A minute.
Oh, there you are.
Hello, hello, hello. Can you hear
Yes,
me?
I hear you now.
Hello. Sorry about that.
Hello.
I was just looking at something. Give me a minute, a second, Laura. I'll be right back. Sorry, just looking for this thing. Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's better.
Yeah. Is that all good? Can you hear me all good? Is it fine?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay. So I found this interesting thing. This is called United States involvement since World War II. I couldn't actually find the previous list before. So do you want to tell you all the involvements they've had since World War II?
Well, I kind of know them, but please, yeah, read the list. Read the list.
Okay, so you have China from 1945 to 1946, Syria 1949, Korea from 1950 to 1953, China from 1950 to 1953, Iran 1953, Guatemala 1954, Tibet 1955 to the 1970s, which was obviously the CIA coup to pretty much get Tibetans to overthrow the Chinese government because they were Tibetan fighters. Indonesia in 1958, Cuba from 1959, the Democratic Republic of Congo 1960 to 1965, Dominican Republic 1961, Vietnam 1961 to 1973, which we all.
Uh-oh, I think we lost Welsh. Welsh, are you muted?
Sorry about that. I'm not going to read all of it, but it's a long list. Give me a second.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? This might
That's
actually
better.
work. This might be better. So yeah, you've got Guatemala 1964. You've got Laos 1964 to 1973. Dominican Republic from 1965 to 1966. Indonesia to 1965. You've got Peru 1965. Greece 1967. Guatemala 1976 to 1969. Cambodia 1969 to 1970. You can still hear me, right, Laurie?
Yeah, all good.
Chile 1970 to 1965, you got Argentina 1976, and then you got Angola 1976 to 1992, Turkey 1980, Poland 1980 to 1981. Wow, I never knew the United States went after Poland in the 1980s. El Salvador from 1981 to 1992, which was a CIA, Q color revolution. Nicaragua, 1981 to 1990. Cambodia again, 1980 to 1995. I think that's something to do with economists, killing people or something. Grenada, 1983.
Oh, we lost you again.
Hear me? It's all good? Sorry.
Yeah, you're cutting in and out
Is
a
it all
bit.
good?
Better
Is that all
now.
good? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, keep going. It's a long
And
list.
then
Keep going.
and then you got Iran, then you got obviously Haiti 1991, then you got the Panama War, which happened. You got actually the Philippines in 1989, which is the second time the United States invaded the Philippines, especially from the Spanish Civil War. That the Spanish Civil War, had against, the Philippines in the 18th century, the 19th century. Then you got Kuwait in 1991, then you got Somalia in 1992 to 1994, then you got Iraq from 1992 to 1996, then you got Bosnia from 1995, then you got Iraq, 1998, Sudan, 1998, Afghanistan, 1998. Obviously the Afghanistan war went on for 20 years. I don't know why it says that. Then you got Yugoslavia, 1999. Then you got Iraq, 2002 to 2003. Then Yemen, 2002, which is currently happening right now still. Then you've got Haiti, 2004. But even though there's also actually a coup going on in Haiti right now, you got Somalia, 2006, 2007. You got Iran, which is still happening, which the United States is still trying to do. Then you got.
It's such a long list, he can't get through it. We lost you, Welsh. You cut out again. Come
Sorry about that.
back.
I'm just really passionate, to say this list. Can you hear me?
Yes, keep going.
Oh, sorry, I'm just trying to find the list. And then obviously you've got and then you've got Brazil 2016, Bolivia 2019, Venezuela 2019, something 2020, Iraq 2020, Somalia 2020, Afghanistan 2020, Ukraine 2014, and the new Nord Stream pipelines 2022. And let's not forget Ethiopia and Sudan 2023.
Man, that's a long, long list. We just can't mind our own business, And most of those wars that or police actions or whatever the hell you want to call them, most of them were done under the guise, at least in the 20th century, of fighting communism. Communism was the enemy and the excuse for us to involve ourselves in the business of other countries and overthrow regimes and do all of these things that we did. And Tyler in our chat room just asked a great question. He said, "Why do they hate Russia so much?" That's the question. And probably the best answer that I could give, just from a historical perspective, is we had good relations with Russia up until 1917, when the October Revolution happened and the Bolsheviks came to power. And from that date forward, the United States positioned ourselves as an enemy of Russia, of the Soviet Union, and of all communist movements and communist nations around the world.
Absolutely.
That was the
That is very true.
justification for all those years of war. And then in the 21st century, of course, the focus shifted to terrorism because the Cold War had ended in 1991. We needed a new boogeyman. We needed a new enemy, a reason to justify all this military spending and these endless wars. And so the new focus after 9/11 became terrorism instead of communism. But after 20 years of that, that's also worn thin. That they need something new, and so they haven't got anything new. And what are they doing? They're going back to the old Cold War stuff. They've started a new Cold War, and they're bringing back McCarthyism, and they're bringing, as we just saw with the indictment of the Uhuru movement last week. If that's not McCarthyism, I don't know what is. You see all this anti-communist Cold War kind of rhetoric now, again, about China, about North Korea. And even though Russia hasn't been communist in some 30 years,
it isn't. It's like a mixed economy. It is economist in a way, but it's also very capitalist. So it's actually a federation democracy. Russia is now.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. And yet there's still a lot of pro-communist sentiment in the old former Soviet Union. To this day, 70% of Russians think that Joseph Stalin was the greatest leader they ever had. And almost 60% of Russians say they'd like to go back to the Soviet Union. The second largest party in Russian politics is still the Communist Party. Communism didn't die just because the regime changed back in 1991. Still a lot of communists in the Soviet Union, but no, the current government that's in control and has been in control ever since is certainly not a communist government. But most Americans don't know the difference. Joe Blow out there, you ask them about Russia, and he's like, "Oh, they're communists over there in Russia." They still, they grew up during the Cold War, and they were deeply indoctrinated, deeply brainwashed, with a lot of, frankly, malarkey. I mean, I'm a historian. I study primary documents, and so much of what we were taught, and I'm a Cold War kid. I went to school during the Cold War. I was indoctrinated too against communism. I was taught to fear Russia and to be afraid of China and to be afraid of the communists. They were the menace. They were going to come get you. There were Reds under the bed, I was taught to believe all that. And it wasn't until many, many, many years later in my life that I started going back and we also had disclosures like the Nazi War Crimes Disclosure Act that we were talking about at the start of the show, where I started to learn the real truth of what we did, and that we crawled into bed with like actual Nazis, all in the name of fighting communism. That's what the whole thing was about. That's why we protected those Nazis and brought them over here, and why we armed and funded and trained guerrilla war groups in the Ukraine. These Ukrainian nationalists from 1945 on we had this, I would call it communism derangement syndrome. It's a kind of mental illness, we've got to destroy Russia. And we still have that unfortunate brain worm in the American psyche. It's terribly unfortunate. Look how many people have died as a result of our anti-communist foreign policy. And I'm not a communist. I'm just telling you. I'm telling you as a historian.
Laurie, do you think the United States needed to drop the nuclear bomb on Japan, because I remember I watched a speech by Nelson Mandela where he was saying that Japan was pretty much already defeated at that time in 1945, at that time when the nuclear bomb was about to be dropped. Do you think they needed to drop the bomb on Japan? And do you think, for the fact that the United States dropped the bomb on the Japanese, which was an absolute act against crime against humanity and was disgusting, and it just caused so much damage to the country of Japan and Hiroshima and Yamazaki, all those areas, and there's still people feeling the effects of the radiation to that day.
Yes.
Do you think that itself, when you look at a moment like that, and especially when you look at that, it also proves that it wasn't. It's funny because the United States are the only country in the world to ever drop the nuclear bomb. Do you think the United States needed to drop a nuclear bomb or no?
We not only did it once, Welsh.
Twice. Sorry, my apology. Twice.
Yeah, we did that twice. It's an atrocity, and we didn't need to do it. It was completely unnecessary. We pretty much had Japan's pledge of surrender at that point. It was unnecessary militarily. And, they were basically testing out their new toy, this nuclear toy that they were so proud of, right? And they have to test it out somewhere. And like I just said, the original idea was to test it out on Russia. And many believe, and I think they are probably correct, that when we dropped those bombs, it wasn't strategically necessary to win the war in Japan, but it was a warning to Russia, to the entire world. Don't mess with us. In a recent speech, Putin compared the United States, NATO, but especially the United States, to a global mafia organization, like a mafia family. And if NATO is the mob, the United States is the godfather. I think that's probably pretty correct. I don't think he's wrong. Do you?
That's not wrong at all. And also comes to the fact, that the District of Columbia in Washington is the military capital of the world, London is the financial capital of the world, and the Vatican is the spiritual capital of the world, and they're all controlled by the WEF, they're all controlled by BlackRock, the elitists. Those are the true enemies. It's not the Russians, it's not the Chinese who are the enemies, it's them. It's not even the United States people, it's them.
Do you hear a cat purring? I have a cat up here in my studio right now, and he's
what's his?
He's like, his name is John John. Okay, I'm a Kennedy fan, right? So I've got the Kennedy cats. I got 3 cats. I got Mama Cat, who's Jacqueline, right? And then she's got twin babies, and they're a boy and a girl, fraternal twins. Solid black, both of them. They identical in every way. One's a girl, one's a boy. The girl is Caroline, and of course, the boy
that's so
is
lovely.
John.
What type of cats are they, Lori?
They're like Bombay, American short hair. Those kind of short-haired, solid black cats. They're really, really sweet-natured, good kids, and that's why I let them hang out in my studio with me when when I'm on the air. But they just jump right up and make themselves at home and get right on the mic or the camera. Sometimes, if you watch me on Maverick News, it does happen sometimes. And the cat just jumps up there and says, "Hello, world! I'm on the camera. Hi." So
I wish I was able to see them. That would have been cool.
I know what he's doing. He's telling me, "Hey, Mom, you've been talking too long. It's time to get off that thing and come pay attention to me." So I guess we're done, aren't we? Has it been about done with the show?
We could someone also just brought up another thing here. Says the scene, Tyler, your friend, says the scene in John Herschel's book Shama when he walks over to a ditch filled with people with whose eyeballs had melted out down their faces would stick will haunt me forever. My government did that. That's very true.
God,
that's very true.
I love that Tyler knows that book. I'm a big fan of John Hersey. And by the way, did you know that Hersey was good friends with JFK?
Wow, I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah, they'd known each other since college, I believe. And then after Kennedy was almost killed on the PT-109 during World War II out in the Solomon Islands, John Hersey was the guy who wrote the story and told the world the story. I think it was in Reader's Digest or one of those magazines. But yeah, Hersey told the story of the PT 109 of his old friend Jack Kennedy.
Wow, that's very interesting.
Mm.
So, Laurie, do you want to finish up now?
Sure, yeah. I should probably call it a night.
Yeah. So, before we go, Laurie, is there anything else you would like to say?
Well, this has been a wonderful interview. Thank you. Thank you for hosting me on your platform on YouTube since my channel is now banned from YouTube. At least I have a place to speak. So thank you for that. And thank you for asking such really good questions. You asked good questions, Welsh. I enjoyed this conversation immensely. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you very much, Laurie. Where can people find you?
Well, I was going to plug my YouTube channel, but it's I'm kind of off the air right now. I mean, you can see my old videos on YouTube. I just can't upload any new content. I do have a Rumble channel, and I'm definitely encouraging people to follow me on Rumble instead. Why watch censorship tube when you have an alternative? And if you really support free speech, please subscribe to my channel on Rumble. It's just Laurie Spencer. And our main channel is Maverick News, and we're on every night. I'm not on the show every night. I'm usually behind the scenes working, but I come on the show a couple times a week. It's Maverick News, and it's a really good news program. Your daily news, 6 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 7 days a week. You can find us on YouTube for now. They haven't banned that channel yet, but they're probably going to pretty soon. And we're also on Rumble. And you can find me on Twitter at Real Laurie Spencer. So if you were curious to find out more about any of the topics, the historical topics we discussed tonight, you can find more info there on my Twitter or on my blog. And all the links are there on Twitter and YouTube. So
thank you for coming on, Laurie. It was a pleasure having you.
thanks,
And I just want to say to everybody, thank you for joining the Welsh Republic podcast, episode 108 today. Please go and subscribe to Laurie's YouTube channel and her Rumble. Give her all the support she needs. It's disgraceful that she was suspended from YouTube. I really wish the censorship would stop, because as a person who had his main YouTube channel taken down a few months, and the fact that I've had to make a backup channel and a Rumble for it is very annoying. Please, everybody, fight the censorship. It shouldn't be allowed. Freedom of speech is one of the most important things in human history, because without it, we would be nothing but sheep for slaughter. So please, everybody, go and support Laurie's work. She does fantastic Twitter threads on exposing the CIA's connections with Nazis and also war history that you'll never find out from the mainstream media. Give her a like and subscribe. And thank you for everybody for joining this podcast. Take care, everybody. God bless you all. Stay safe. Never give up. Bye.